At dinner, I was placed in the corner of the table, with nothing in front of me but a plate of meager, cheap leftovers. Meanwhile, my son-in-law sat with his legs stretched out on the table, a glass of whiskey in his hand, his eyes glancing at me with disdain. He tilted his chin up, his voice dripping with arrogance and conceit. "How does it feel to be a loser, useless, and nothing but a freeloader, old man?" he sneered, laughing with great delight. I merely shook my head and gave a faint smile. With just one gentle sentence, each word cutting through his arrogance like a blade, I replied, "You'll find out soon enough, when you realize that from now on, this so-called useless loser will no longer be paying a single bill for this family." The air froze instantly. His laughter died in his throat. In that moment, the family dinner was no longer a place of gathering. It had become an invisible battlefield. And this was only the beginning. Every ounce of his insolence and unfilial behavior would come at a price bit by bit, piece by piece. You wouldn't believe what I did next. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know your thoughts about this story in the comments below. That evening, the warm light of the crystal chandelier poured down, spreading across the expensive walnut dining table, a luxury that Laura and I had chosen together, its price equal to an entire month of my former salary. The irony was bitter. I had paid for it. Yet now I was forced to sit humbly at the far corner of the table, with nothing before me but a piece of cheap, discounted beef reheated from the previous night's leftovers. It made me feel even more out of place in the very home I had called mine for 16 years. At the head of the table, the seat I once held during family dinners, but which in recent years Victor had claimed for himself, he lounged arrogantly like a conqueror. In one hand, he swirled a glass of expensive whiskey that I had given him as a celebratory gift when he was promoted to a minor managerial position. His legs were propped up on the table as though he were a king. His eyes gleamed with smug triumph as he glanced at me, his voice booming with disdain. "Mr. David, retirement must have been quite comfortable these past few years, huh? No pressure, no responsibilities, just eat and sleep like some useless parasite. A man who holds no value to this family or to society anymore." I slowly set down my fork, the cold piece of cheap beef still untouched on my plate. The bitterness rose to my throat like a knot I could not swallow. I knew he wanted to boast, but it wasn't just that he wanted to slice away at my dignity, word by word, like a knife. Victor went on, his voice dripping with condescension. "I mean, don't get me wrong. I won't deny that back in the day, when you worked as an automotive engineer, you were passable though hardly worth bragging about. But that's the past, isn't it? Now is the age of speed, technology, and the young, full of energy. They're the ones who run the game. Isn't that right, old man?" Laura trembled slightly, her fingers instinctively touching the necklace I once gave her as if seeking some fragment of calm. But the humiliation was too much. Her eyes turned red, and her voice grew sharp. "Dad designed cars, assembly lines work that's still being used today. That's the real achievement." Yeah, Victor waved dismissively. "But when was the last time he did anything worthwhile? Or are you counting that watch he gave me for my birthday last year? That cheap little thing from the supermarket worth only a few bucks?" My hands clenched beneath the table. Last year, I had saved for months to buy him a genuine imported watch, very expensive, thinking he would appreciate it. But he never valued it, never wore it, and now he twisted the truth, turning it into a joke, belittling it as something worthless. Suddenly, Sophie set down her fork with a soft clatter. In her voice, innocence mixed with indignation, as though she wanted to shield me from those poisonous words. "Grandpa made me the swing last summer." Victor chuckled mockingly, patting her head as if he were some benevolent king. "Cute, sweetheart. But you need to understand real men provide for their families with their own effort and intellect, not by lying around in retirement while others carry the burdens on their shoulders." That dinner, prepared to celebrate Victor's promotion just to a small branch manager, had turned into nothing more than a tragic comedy. The food sat cooling on the table, untouched. The heavy air of tension smothered the entire room. Laura forced a strained laugh, trying to keep her tone calm. "Maybe we should talk about something else." Sophie, Tell your grandpa about your ballet performance." But Victor had no intention of stopping. His recent promotion had inflated him like a balloon, and the alcohol only made him more reckless. His voice echoed with arrogance, every word dripping with the intoxication of his imagined power. "Actually, I've been thinking. Now that I'm earning real money, $50,000 a year, a salary worthy of my hard work, maybe it's about time everyone in this house carried their own weight." I knew exactly what he meant. 15 years of paying off their mortgage, tuition, car loans, and medical bills. 15 years of watching him squander money while I quietly filled the gaps. I remembered every check I wrote in silence, every sleepless night working overtime to make sure payments were on time, while they indulged in parties and extravagant vacations. And now, all those sacrifices were dismissed with one cold remark. "Take Laura, for example," Victor said, pointing directly at my daughter, his lips curling with contempt. "She's been sitting at home for far too long, living off of, well, let's just call it the family's generosity. Maybe it's about time she stopped living comfortably under someone else's protection and stepped back into the real world where people pay their own bills without holding out their hands." Laura's face turned pale. She knew, just as I did, that their entire luxurious lifestyle depended entirely on my quiet support, the same useless old man Victor saw me as. The designer clothes, shoes, jewelry, and luxury items they flaunted on social media. The lease on the gleaming Mercedes-Benz Victor proudly drove every day. Even the grand house renovation completed 3 summers ago. None of it would have been possible without my money. I clenched my fists under the table until my knuckles cracked. Hearing him speak of my daughter as a burden made my chest tighten painfully. Ethan, my 14-year-old grandson, immediately sensed the tension in the air. "Are we in some kind of trouble, Dad?" Victor waved a hand dismissively and gave a smug grin. "Of course not, son, but it's important to understand the difference between those who earn and those who depend, between providers and—" He paused, locking his arrogant, insolent gaze directly on me. "Those who have given up, who are worthless. That be dizing down it is worthless. That were Ephesians 17 down. Well who sell, worthless. We're worthless, who are 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 worthless, who have given up, who are worthless, who are worth—" My heart clenched. I wanted to fight back, to stand and shout right in his face, but my throat tightened. Thinking of my grandchildren, I bowed my head instead, my trembling hand resting on my knee, trying to hide the burning shame searing through my chest. The insult hung in the air, thick like an invisible smoke clinging to every corner of the room. Laura reached out with trembling hands for the glass of wine, her fingers shaking uncontrollably. The rim of the glass struck the edge of the plate, producing a dry, metallic clink, tiny, yet echoing straight into the soul. The children sat silently, their wide eyes filled with confusion and fear, glancing at one another as though they had just witnessed a massive storm slowly forming right there in the family dining room. Victor leaned forward, the stench of whiskey pouring from his breath, drawing courage from what he thought was my silence. His voice thundered, arrogant. "I don't mean to be too harsh, David," he continued, his tone full of challenge. "Tell me, when was the last time you did anything meaningful? The last time you knew the feeling of earning your own money, of standing on your own 2 feet, instead of merely existing breathing as a burden?" He paused deliberately for emphasis, then unleashed the final blow, his face glowing with smug triumph. "How does it feel to be a failure, useless, nothing more than a parasite, old man?" That question struck like the final punch meant to shatter my dignity. The dining room seemed frozen. Everyone's faces bore expressions of shock, as if they couldn't believe what they had just heard. But I didn't even blink. I slowly lifted my glass of water, took a sip, and then suddenly slammed my hand down hard on the table. The sharp thud echoed, startling everyone. I looked Victor straight in the eye, my voice calm, each word cutting clear. "You'll feel it soon enough. When you realize that from now on, this useless failure will no longer be paying a single bill for this family. No tuition fees, no insurance, no mortgage, not a single dime. Victor's face shifted from pale to ghostly white. His smile vanished as though it had never existed. He stumbled backward, knocking over his chair, his eyes wide, his lips stammering. What did you just say?" Laura covered her mouth, fear and shame mixing into a painful expression. The children stared at their father in shock, watching the arrogant, triumphant mask he always wore crumble into something close to panic. As for me, I returned to my dinner, calmly slicing the cheap, cold beef as if nothing had happened. Outside, the night was swallowing the suburbs whole, the distant barking of dogs echoing, heralding that something was about to change forever. After a silence that stretched endlessly, I set down my knife and fork, wiped my mouth with the cloth napkin. I stood, leaned down, and kissed Sophie gently on the forehead, then patted Ethan's head. "Thank you for dinner, Laura. It was delicious." I walked down the hall, gathered a few worn-out clothes along with the important folders, packed them all into a small suitcase, and left. Outside, the cold February wind slapped against my face, but compared to the chill inside that house, it almost felt comforting. Behind me, the dining table remained frozen in silence, eyes still blank, minds just beginning to grasp the truth. 16 years of generosity, patience, and quiet endurance from me had meant absolutely nothing, and from tonight onward, they would one by one taste the price of the disrespect and insolence they had sown into my heart. The heavy suitcase dragged behind me, each step weighed down by tons of disappointment. The walk home was less than 10 minutes, but in my heart, it felt endless. My worn-out coat, its fabric thinned at the elbows, quivered with every cold gust of wind. I pulled the collar higher, a reflex of self-defense, but nothing could shield me from the storm raging inside. When the iron gate appeared, I stopped. My old house stood silently in the night, its steps covered with a thin layer of dust, the furniture inside abandoned for years, though I sometimes returned to clean so it would not completely decay. I set the suitcase down and opened the door. The motion sensor light flicked on, casting my shadow long across the steps, like the silhouette of a lonely man returning to his own home. I hung my coat in the hallway closet, my hand brushing against the warped, cracked wood, reminding me of the long, deteriorating life I had endured. I took a deep breath. Refusing to linger in emptiness too long, I walked straight into the study, where memories still waited for me to confront them. In the study, I pulled the files out of the suitcase and placed them on the wooden desk, darkened by the passage of years. The dim yellow glow from the desk lamp fell across the neatly stacked folders, each page like a layer of memory I had locked away, holding 16 years of meaningless sacrifice, 16 years of silence. I sat down, my hands trembling as I opened each file. The musty scent of old paper rose, the letters fading with time. Page after page, from mortgage bills to bank statements to canceled checks, stood as undeniable traces of kindness I once believed was noble. But now, they were nothing more than evidence of a mistake. Now it was not only about counting the money I had lost, but about facing the bitter truth. My kindness had been exploited, and my silence had become an excuse for others to insult and mock me. The first mortgage payment, $3,500 in March, another $3,500 in April, and so it went, month after month, year after year. The sequence of figures lined up neatly, mocking me, $3,500 each month, for 180 months. The computer screen showed the number, $630,000, just for the mortgage support on Victor and Laura's big house. Next came the cars, Victor's shiny Mercedes-Benz lease, Laura's luxury SUV loan, $1,200 a month for 9 years, totaling $129,600. Then came insurance fees, maintenance, new tires, small amounts individually, but not small at all when added up. Each file reminded me of a memory, of dreams buried, of sacrifices I made, things I sometimes wanted to forget. The private school tuition receipts for the children filled 2 folders. Ethan's education from kindergarten to 8th grade, Sophie's from preschool to 5th grade. Elite schools with swimming pools, modern labs, foreign language programs, extravagant summer camps, and extracurriculars. $36,000 each year, 14 years, $504,000. I once thought that money was a door to the children's future, but now I see it became a one-way ticket that turned me into a useless dependent, servicing their endless demands. And it didn't stop there. Health insurance when Victor was unemployed, dental care for the kids, midnight emergency visits, even therapy for Laura after the divorce shock 4 years ago. Each envelope stuffed with receipts I had quietly paid. $10,000 a year, for 16 years $160,000. Tucked between the bills, I found costs they never mentioned. The Universal Studios Orlando trip in 2016, the Caribbean cruise in 2019, the ski vacation in Vail, Colorado, Christmas gifts, urgent car repairs, the bathroom renovation deposit last year $75,000 in miscellaneous support, and bitterest of all, the bribes and expensive gifts that helped Victor climb to a mediocre manager's seat he thought was a pinnacle. He never knew, never asked. I even chipped in to cover his parents' hospital bills. When added together, the final number made me collapse back into my chair. It danced on the computer screen, $1,498,600. Nearly $1.5 million. My hands trembled, cold sweat beaded on my forehead. I never imagined the sum would be that large. $1.5 million paid with years of hard labor, endless overtime, pension checks, the savings of an old couple, and abandoned dreams. For the first time since Helen's funeral, I felt the full weight of the promise I had made at her bedside, a noble vow that turned me into a prisoner of my own devotion, humiliation, and mistreatment. I remembered her tearful eyes, her trembling hand gripping mine. "Don't worry about Laura. You'll keep her safe." I had kept my word, but the cost was me. I still remembered the cakes Laura baked as thank yous, the Sunday afternoons of laughter and warm hugs from the children, but all of it faded. Gratitude turned into entitlement. And somewhere along the way, I was no longer a pillar but a pathetic failure they mocked. I looked around the room. The 21-year-old sedan in the garage still sat there, old and heavy, while Victor drove a shiny new Mercedes. Travel brochures lay forgotten in yellowed files, while their family photos from Universal Studios Orlando still covered the fridge while I buried myself in work. Hobbies abandoned. Church gatherings with friends declined, always because I was busy taking care of the family. I had given away nearly $1.5 million over 16 years in exchange for my old age, my dreams, my dignity. At 11:30 that night, I reached for the phone and my bank directory. Tomorrow, I thought, would be a very long day. Sunday morning, the hot coffee on the kitchen table tasted stronger than usual. I sat in silence, watching the birds squabble over crumbs outside the window, then returned to the office where the stacks of papers stood like chess pieces, ready for the final move. The first call to National Bank was answered after 3 rings. "Account services, this is James. How may I help you?" "I need to cancel the automatic payments from checking account, number 46887943265. My voice was steady and low, the same tone I had used for years giving technical presentations. "Please provide the last 4 digits of your Social Security for verification." 10 minutes later, James completed the process. A few keystrokes, and 16 years of financial architecture collapsed. "The payments have been canceled, Mr. David. Is there anything else I can help you with?" "That's all, thank you." I checked off mortgage support, $3,500 month. Colorado Mountain Insurance required a supervisor. Canceling the Mercedes lease took 2 transfers. All followed the familiar sequence: verification, processing, carefully noting the confirmation code in my notebook. By 10:15 a.m., 9 items were crossed out. At 11:35 the phone rang. "Dad! Dad!" Laura's voice shook, panicked. "Something's wrong with the mortgage. The bank says the account doesn't have enough funds, but that's impossible because..." The silence between us stretched tight as a snapped violin string. I heard her sobs. Was it regret or just fear now that she had no safety net? "What do you mean, Dad?" Laura choked. "Exactly what I said last night. I will not pay for your family anymore." "No, Dad, you can't." "Dad, I'll lose the house. Ethan's school, health insurance, everything. Everything stopped this morning." The words were calm, quiet, but I felt as though I had severed the last cord tying me to Laura, to the children, to the family I had sacrificed years to protect. The line went dead. I looked down at my notebook. 7 more calls waited. And for the first time in 16 years, I felt free, light. The service providers processed things so quickly that it surprised me. The accounting department at Briarwood Academy only asked a few procedural questions. I carefully recorded each confirmation code in my notebook, precise as a programmed machine. 1:26, the phone rang. Laura's voice was trembling, carrying true panic. "Dad, please, Dad. I don't understand what's happening. The kids' school just called, then the insurance company, even the power and water suppliers. They said all our payments were rejected because you canceled the transfers." I remained calm. "My account? Do you think that money appeared out of nowhere, Laura?" A heavy silence hung in the air. But we never asked you." "Correct. You never asked, because you never had to. I always carried it all in silence." "We can't afford it," her voice broke. "Yes, and that is exactly the problem. And it is?" 1:41, the phone rang again. Victor. His voice was rough, trying to sound authoritative but laced with tension. "David, you think you're so smart? Stop this childish nonsense right now. You're driving my whole family insane. This isn't a game, Victor. This is just reality. You can't ruin my family just because you felt slightly offended at a dinner." "I'm not ruining anything. I just stopped being your ATM. Want to know what failure feels like? Pay your own bills." The silence on the other end lasted even longer than Laura's. 2:16 in the afternoon, the familiar roar of a Mercedes-Benz shattered the stillness outside the driveway. I looked through the window. Victor slammed the car door, face flushed. Laura followed behind, eyes red, clutching her purse as if it were a lifeline. I opened the door before they could knock. "We need to talk." Victor shoved me aside, barging straight into the living room without a greeting, as though he owned the place. Laura trailed behind, her eyes pleading yet filled with reproach. I closed the door. "Come in," I said to the 2 stiff, furious figures with their backs turned toward me. Victor stood in the middle of the living room, sneering, his eyes scanning every corner of the house. "Put away your old man pride. You have no right to disrupt my family just because your ego got bruised over a meal. You've lived off us for years, you get your pension regularly, and yet you still complain. Who do you think you are that we should be grateful?" I won't do it anymore." Victor's face turned crimson, veins bulging in his neck. He screamed, his voice trembling between rage and despair. "You can't just cut us off like this. This is a legal obligation, a kind of verbal contract. You've been doing it for 16 years, doesn't that bind you?" I looked straight into his eyes, calm enough to make him falter. "A contract?" I emphasized each word. "Then show me where is there any document stating I agreed to pay your family's bills for life? What you call obligation is nothing but your selfish assumption, Victor." Laura stepped forward, her voice choked with tears streaming down her face. "Dad, please think of what Mom would want. You're destroying this family over your pride. If she were alive, she would be ashamed to see you act this way." The name Helen struck me like a blade through the chest. I took a deep breath, kept my voice steady. Even if the sky collapsed, calmness was the only thing I allowed to show. "I promise to help you find stability. 16 years, nearly $1.5 million, and you're more fragile now than at the beginning." $1.5 million? Laura gasped, stepping back, eyes wide with disbelief. I placed the notebook and calculator on the table. $1,498,600. Every cent recorded here. That's not just a number, Victor. That's my blood, my time, my entire life sacrificed for your family. And what did I get in return? Insults or contempt? Laura collapsed into a chair, her face pale. Victor froze, stammering 3 seconds later. No way. We never asked. You never asked. You only assumed and indulged. Laura burst into sobs, rushing to grab my hand, her words breaking apart between sobs. Dad, we didn't know. We never imagined it was that much. I thought you helped because you cared. I thought it was love. And now it turns out you counted every penny. You're turning love into debt, and you'll lose us because of it. I looked down at her trembling hands clutching mine. My voice was steady, every word firm. I want to be treated like a father, a grandfather, not like some useless freeloader, thrown scraps of cheap food and contemptuous looks. Your gratitude cannot erase 16 years of disdain. And now, those days are over. Victor roared out of control. You will pay for this. You'll never see the kids again. If you don't restore the payments, I'll tear this house apart. He yanked a picture frame from the shelf and smashed it on the floor. A table lamp toppled over. Laura screamed, trying to stop him but still crying and blaming me. Dad, why are you doing this? Don't you love me, love your grandchildren anymore? Just because of a few harsh words, you'd abandon the whole family? I stood calmly. In their eyes, I saw panic, flattery laced with threats. After hurling curses, Victor lowered his voice, trying to sound soft. What do you want? Say it. Thanks. Fine, thank you. Promises? I promise. You just need to call the bank, restore the transfers, and we'll be a family again. I let out a cold, mocking laugh. Family? What kind of family treats their father like an ATM, their love like an obligation? You didn't lose me because of money. You lost me the moment you stopped respecting me. Laura sobbed louder, choking on her words. Dad, please, if we lose the house, lose everything. Then what? I gently patted my daughter's shoulder, my gaze unwavering. Then you'll finally know what true failure feels like, and maybe for the first time, you'll learn how to stand on your own 2 feet. The room fell silent. Victor and Laura could only stare at me in shock. Laura collapsed, crying uncontrollably. Victor turned away, his face dark purple, and for the first time in 16 years, I saw them truly afraid. The old wooden door of my house rattled violently after the furious slam as he stormed into the yard. When he got into Victor's Mercedes, he punched the steering wheel again and again, roaring madly, as if he wanted to pierce the air with his rage. Then he slammed on the gas, the roar of the exhaust shattering the quiet neighborhood. I stood by the window, watching the car disappear at the end of the street, realizing that my hands were trembling uncontrollably. Silence flooded the house, like water crashing through a broken dam. I collapsed into the old wooden recliner, a gift from Helen on our 15th wedding anniversary, and my eyes stopped at the wedding photo on the mantel. Laura, radiant in her white wedding dress, Victor in a simple suit and bow tie, and Helen beside me, her face shining like the Sunday. That year was 2008. Back then, Victor was just a junior employee at a small company, driving a nearly 25-year-old Toyota. In our very first private conversation, he lowered his head, his eyes timid, full of respect. Mr. David, I want you to know that I will take good care of Laura. I don't have much yet, but I will work hard to build something worthy of your daughter. That humility in his voice was real then. I believed him believe so much that I never suspected one day this very man would sneer in my face and treat me like a rag. A little more than a year later, Helen was taken by that cruel disease, cancer. After only 3 months of brutal struggle, she was gone, leaving Laura broken and Victor scrambling with his meager entry-level salary, barely managing a small mortgage. That was in 2009, when the economic crisis had just struck, and Victor's company began laying off employees. At Helen's funeral, Laura collapsed into my chest, her shoulders trembling. Dad, I don't know how to manage. Victor's job isn't stable. And the house payments, too. Don't worry, I whispered, holding my desperate daughter. I'll help until you two are stable. In that moment, I almost felt Helen still there, her pleading eyes looking at me. I had promised to take care of our daughter for her, but I never promised to support their ingratitude. In the early years, Victor was extremely grateful. Handwritten thank you cards, joyful weekend gatherings, Laura called daily, chatting, baking cakes with gratitude every Sunday evening. "Dad, you are saving our whole family," she cried, holding my hand. "We will repay you for the rest of our lives." The first mortgage payment, $3,500. "Just for half a year," Victor promised, "until my salary becomes more stable." The car loan, $1,200 a month, just until we save enough for the house. Private school tuition for Ethan, $3,000 a month, just for kindergarten, to give him a good foundation. The promise of "only until we are stable" dissolved like smoke. All those "just until" turned into permanence, then into endless demands. My generosity became their assumed obligation. I worked overtime, countless extra shifts. My high salary as an automotive engineer could have given me a dream life, but it was drained away by their increasingly absurd requests. Dance classes for Sophie, a new tablet, European vacations, luxury resorts. Not once did they ask, "Dad, do you have enough money?" It was always commands. "Dad needs to." By 2013, the thank you notes vanished. Victor's check-ins and conversations grew fewer, then disappeared. Instead, there were his beer sessions, complaints about his boss, while I quietly wrote another check. Laura only came to my room when she needed money. By 2019, Victor had completely forgotten what gratitude was. At the year-end party with neighbors, he thumped his chest, boasting about his wise financial skills, bragging about investments, the new Mercedes, and the successful lifestyle he claimed to have built. I stood right there, holding a beer, listening to his endless bragging, while Laura laughed along to support him. He saw himself as the center, while I, the one who paid for everything, was nothing but an invisible shadow. When I gently suggested they should shoulder part of the burden, Laura glared. "Dad always thinks in the old way. You don't understand how much Victor has sacrificed. You can't just sit there and expect everything to be fine. Don't make us carry more burden." The word burden hit me like a slap in the face. I had endured endless lonely nights after Helen's death, swallowed my tears to keep going, only to be repaid with such cold judgment. Last Thanksgiving, no one mentioned my support. Victor raised his glass to toast his own hard work providing for the family. Laura posted pictures of expensive gifts, with the hashtag number "Blessed Family Success Health." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. Blessed? What blessing? It was only blood, tears, and my entire life poured out and treated as nothing more than an obligation. I sat on the porch, my hand gently brushing over the faded lines of an old thank you card from the year 2010. The handwriting, once filled with warmth and innocence, had now turned yellow with time. I no longer remembered how long it had been since I last received such a card. I suddenly asked myself, when did tears of gratitude dry up, giving way to shameless demands? The sunset slowly descended, its golden rays stretching across the lawn. Deep inside, I understood what Helen would have wanted. Not endless indulgence, but dignity. Not limitless generosity, but respect. She would never have wanted me to become an emotionless cash machine. Then the financial storm struck, sweeping away the false walls Laura and Victor had built over the years. Just a few days later, Laura called, her voice trembling, breaking into little sobs. "Dad," the bank said, the mortgage was denied. "They're demanding $35,075 immediately. Otherwise, in a while, they'll begin the foreclosure process." "Dad, I don't know how to manage anymore." I stayed silent, letting the silence itself grip her, forcing her to face the truth and the quiver in her own voice. The next day, Victor's yelling burst through the phone line, as if it were me, not him, who had squandered 16 years of support. "David, you must end this childish punishment right now. You're destroying my family." I replied calmly, "No, Victor, I'm only stopping myself from being destroyed." He growled, then his voice cracked. "Yes, you have money, so use it. You're old already. Who else will you give it to, if not your family?" At least this time, he finally spoke the truth he had long refused to admit. Laura called again, her voice choked with reproach. "Dad, you're abandoning us, pushing us into the abyss. After all that Mom wished for, how could you do this?" I clenched my teeth, holding back from saying that it was their ingratitude and disregard for kindness that had pushed me into the deepest abyss of all. News began to spread in the community. I ran into Linda at the supermarket, my daughter's neighbor. She pointed a finger right in my face, her shrill voice echoing through the aisles. "David, you should be ashamed. What would Helen think if she saw you abandon Laura at her hardest time?" I answered briefly, my tone light but steady. Helen would think 16 years and nearly $1.5 million were more than enough. The eyes around us turned toward Linda. In that moment, I saw clearly that truth knew how to stand on its own, even when I did not have to shout it aloud. And reality kept unfolding. Victor's luxury car was towed away from the garage, replaced by an old sedan. Laura had to work, standing all day at the supermarket checkout counter, scanning items in her red uniform, her eyes avoiding everyone's gaze in embarrassment. At school, Ethan was called out by his teacher for not paying tuition. His classmates mocked him, turned their backs, refused to play with him. Sophie sat quietly at the back of the classroom, her face bewildered, unable to understand why her small world had changed so quickly. One evening, Ethan called, his voice filled with fear. "Grandpa, Mom and Dad are fighting again. This time they even smashed the coffee table. Dad shouted that Mom's work doesn't bring in much anyway. Mom said Dad only knows how to spend money and depend on you." I'm scared. I closed my eyes, keeping my voice steady. "Listen to me, Ethan. None of this is your fault. Adults sometimes create their own troubles. Your only job is to study and keep Sophie safe. I promise, you'll never have to carry their burdens." A few days later, Sophie ran to my house. The moment she saw me, she burst into tears, clutching me tightly. "Grandpa, why is everything like this? Mom and Dad are fighting. Ethan locks himself in his room. I'm scared. I miss you." I bent down, hugging my little granddaughter, stroking her hair, my eyes burning but my voice still gentle. "I miss you too, my love, and I'll always be here. No one can take away the love I have for you." In those tear-filled, innocent eyes, I suddenly saw Helen's gentle gaze again, as if reminding me that my decision, though bitter, was still the right one. But painfully, that lesson came at the cost of my grandchildren's and my daughter's tears. A few days later, I was sitting in the living room, flipping through the pages of a newspaper when the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, I saw Victor standing there. His usual arrogance had vanished, replaced by the look of a man broken, cornered. His shirt was wrinkled, his tie hung loose, his face gaunt with hollow, dark-ringed eyes, making him appear a decade older in just a short time. "David," he rasped, his voice hoarse, "I need to talk to you, and only man to man." I raised my hand, motioning him to come in. Victor slumped into the chair. The creak it made sounded strange in the room that once witnessed him stand like a king, waving his hands, issuing demands, insisting that I keep paying as if it were my duty. Now, his position was completely reversed, a defeated man, bowing to beg. He clasped his hands tightly together, his hoarse voice trembling. "The foreclosure is real. We only have 30 days left. Laura is exhausted from 40 hours of physical labor, earning $13 an hour, money that isn't enough to cover even a fraction of the kids' school expenses. I bring home about $5,800 a month before taxes. The mortgage alone is $2,875. How do you think we're supposed to manage that?" He lifted his head to look at me. For the first time in 16 years, his eyes held no trace of arrogant defiance, only the bitterness of a man realizing he had been nothing more than a shadow all along. "It's all because of you, David," Victor blurted out, his tone both resentful and choked. "If you hadn't spoiled us from the start, I would have learned to stand on my own. But you made us used to living off you, to indulging. Now that you've pulled away, my whole world has collapsed. The house I bragged about, the cars I was proud of, even the kids' education, it was all built on your money. I never truly created anything myself." I sat upright, my tone calm but each word landing heavy like hammer blows. "No, Victor, you never stood on your own. You leaned on me so much you forgot your own legs could walk, and now you blame me for refusing to remain your crutch?" Victor fell silent, inhaled deeply, then shifted his tone into flattery. "David, I've thought a lot about what you said. about learning respect and gratitude instead of entitlement. I know I was wrong, and I will change. I promise I'll be grateful. I'll respect you, only if you come back to the house like before, keep helping us get through. Please, just one last time. I slowly shook my head. Victor, gratitude isn't something one can promise. It must be proven. And you've proven the opposite for 16 years. I have nothing left to give, except the chance for you to stand on your own. Leave this place. Tonight. The room sank into silence, broken only by the ticking of the wall clock. Victor lowered his head, rose to his feet, his shoulders heavy as though carrying tons of disappointment. I watched his figure through the window. His steps faltered, staggering slowly into the suburban night. One by one, the streetlights flickered on, casting their pale yellow glow over the quiet street, as if the entire neighborhood was holding its breath, witnessing a man who once strutted in arrogance now bow his head in defeat, facing for the first time the raw truth. He alone must pay the price for his prideful life. Friday afternoon, while I was sitting and sorting through the financial files, the doorbell rang. I stepped out and saw Laura standing on the doorstep. She was no longer the polished woman in designer clothes and flawless makeup she had been for the past 15 years. Instead, before my eyes stood a worn-out Laura in a red supermarket jacket. Her hair was disheveled, her face gaunt, her eyes sunken and swollen from crying. Tears still streaked down her cheeks, and her body had grown noticeably thinner after just a few months of grueling labor. There was no trace left of the glamorous, showy lifestyle, only exhaustion, despair, and helplessness. For a fleeting moment, I saw once again the little girl who had clung tightly to me at Helen's funeral. "Dad, please," Laura's voice choked with sobs. "We need to talk about Ethan and Sophie." I invited her inside. She collapsed onto the wooden chair in the living room, unpinned the supermarket name tag from her chest, her hands trembling. "Dad, the kids, they're suffering so much. Sophie cries every night, haunted by having to leave her own room. Ethan has started to pull away. He's angry with us for making you upset. I no longer have time for them. I have to work 40 hours a week, standing all day at the supermarket, my back aching, and the wages aren't enough to make ends meet. Yesterday, Mrs. Henderson passed by, looked at me with pity, and asked, 'Why is David's daughter standing here scanning groceries?' I just wanted to disappear from that look. Dad, I beg you, I can't take it anymore. Please come back. Please help us one last time. I'm begging you." I looked at Laura for a long while. Every word of hers tore at my memory, but I kept my voice cold. "I will only take care of the children. I will pay their tuition directly at Briarwood Academy, cover their clothing, health care, sports, music, and even their college fund. But I will not pay a single penny for the big house, the luxury cars, or the wasteful lifestyle you two had before. Adults must learn to bear the consequences. You can rent a smaller place, live within your actual means." Laura nodded quickly, almost desperately. "We'll do that, I promise, as long as the children can be safe." I leaned back, my voice firm. "There is one condition. I want Victor, in front of everyone, family, neighbors, community, to kneel and apologize to me. To publicly admit that the past 16 years were not a family success, but the result of a father's generosity. I want the truth brought to light, to end all the lies." Laura's face turned pale, and she stammered, He will never do that. His pride." I cut her off. "If Victor's pride is more important than his children, then let Ethan and Sophie bear the cost. As for me, I will not bend any further." The room went silent. Laura buried her face in her hands, sobbing. Finally, I spoke decisively. "You have 3 days to convince him. After that, this offer will expire." Laura rose slowly, her jacket crumpled from a long, exhausting day. Before leaving the door, she turned back, her voice breaking. "Dad, thank you for still thinking of Ethan and Sophie." I watched her old Toyota roll down the street, and I could only sigh. "I have never stopped caring about you, Laura. I just stopped enabling you." For an instant, the image of Helen returned to my mind, her eyes gentle yet resolute. It was as if she whispered, love never means indulgence or excessive pampering. Laura's Toyota turned into the driveway at 6:25 p.m. Later, I would know the details of that evening from David, the neighbor who often overheard the arguments echoing from their kitchen at that time. Victor was reheating a cold hamburger, the greasy smell filling the dim kitchen, a makeshift dinner in a family on the brink of collapse. When Laura walked in, still in her crumpled supermarket vest uniform, her red-rimmed eyes immediately caught his attention. "Where were you? Your shift ended at 3 o'clock. Victor looked up, his voice thick with suspicion. Laura let out a long sigh. "I went to see Dad." The dry beep of the microwave pierced the dead silence. Victor set the steaming hamburger on the counter, turned to face his wife, his eyes blazing. "You dared sneak off to beg him behind my back? Do you want to make me the laughingstock of the whole neighborhood?" Laura slumped into a chair, pulled off her name tag, her hands trembling. "We don't have time anymore, Victor. In just a few days the house will be foreclosed. The kids are terrified. I had to try something." "Dad agreed to help, but with conditions," Laura said, her voice drawn from the depths of despair. "What conditions?" Victor asked, gripping the chair's edge as if it were his only anchor. "He will cover tuition, clothes, medical expenses, every activity for Ethan and Sophie. He will set up a college fund for both of them." Victor's eyes lit up. "Perfect. When will he start paying the mortgage again?" Laura shook her head faintly. "He won't. We have to live on exactly what we earn." Victor's face darkened, the spark that had just appeared instantly extinguished. "That's impossible. You know our expenses." Laura swallowed her tears. "He wants one more thing, to kneel down, to apologize publicly, and to admit that for 16 years he spent $1,498,600 to support us." Victor exploded, his face blazing red. He slammed his hand on the table, the hamburger flying to the floor. "He wants me to kneel and apologize, to confess that I've been a freeloader for 16 years? I'd rather die first." Laura sprang up, shouting, tears streaming down her face. "No, Victor, that wasn't an obligation, it was a miracle Dad gave us. And you? You turned that miracle into indulgence, into an excuse never to try. You're useless, so useless you can't even provide for your own children." From upstairs, Ethan's trembling voice echoed, "Mom, Sophie says Grandpa abandoned us. Is that true?" Both froze, realizing the children had overheard. Sophie stood at the top of the stairs, her eyes blurred with tears. "Are you fighting about Grandpa again?" Laura rushed to hug her daughter, while Victor punched the wall, roaring in the kitchen like a madman. When Laura returned, she found her husband slumped, his head in his hands, staring blankly at the foreclosure notice. He mumbled like a broken man. "I'd rather see the house sealed, the car towed away, than kneel at his feet." Laura, trembling, opened her phone, frantically typing numbers. "Our total income is $7,900, mortgage $3,575. That leaves $4,325. Toyota $360, insurance $300, utilities $350, food $700, gas $250. That leaves $2,625. See? We're fine." Victor looked up, clinging to the last thread of hope. Laura kept typing, tears dripping onto the screen. "Basketball tournament $220, dance class $150, clothes, medical bills, birthdays, Christmas presents. Victor, we can't afford to raise our kids." Her voice broke, dissolving into the cold, merciless numbers. From upstairs, Ethan called again. "Mom, Sophie is crying. She says we're going to lose the house." Laura's throat tightened, her eyes hollow. "We have 3 days to decide. Dad's offer expires at noon on Tuesday." Then she went upstairs to comfort the children, leaving Victor alone in the dark kitchen. The foreclosure notice lay sprawled on the counter beside the glowing computer screen. Its pale light reflected the haggard face bowed down, a stubborn man about to lose everything, yet still clinging to his empty pride. Early Monday morning, at 9:15, the slow Toyota pulled into my driveway, as if it too were exhausted by the weight of the 4 people inside. Through the living room window, I saw Victor step out from the passenger seat. His hair was disheveled, his tie crooked to one side, his shirt wrinkled as if it had been crumpled through sleepless nights of worry. His gait was unsteady, his trembling hand gripping the handle of his briefcase, his eyes bloodshot and hollow as though he had been wrestling all night with an invisible enemy, the fear of losing everything. Laura knocked on the door. Beside her were Ethan and Sophie in their school uniforms. Victor stood behind them, head bowed, his face heavy like a defendant awaiting judgment. "Dad, we accept your offer. All of it," Laura said, her voice trembling. I invited them to the wooden sofa set in the living room. Ethan and Sophie sat huddled together. Laura sat in the very chair she had occupied a few days earlier, while Victor remained standing, his hands clasped together, his back stiff, as if clinging to the last fragments of his pride. "This morning the bank called," Laura continued. "The foreclosure will be completed at 10 a.m. tomorrow, unless we pay $10,725. We don't have that money." Sophie tugged gently at my sleeve, her eyes brimming with tears. "Grandpa, will we really lose our home?" I placed my hand on her hair. "No, sweetheart, not if I can help it." Victor cleared his throat, as though something was stuck there. He walked slowly toward the fireplace mantel, staring at the wedding photo of me and Helen, then turned back. His lips moved, his head lowered. "David, I need to say something." He hesitated, took a deep breath, then spoke as if each word were a knife cutting into himself. 16 years ago, I accepted your temporary help, but I turned it into permanent dependency without ever acknowledging what you sacrificed. I bragged about renovating the house thanks to career success, flaunted the new cars, the lavish vacations so everyone would believe I was the provider, so the kids would think their grandfather was just kind. The truth is, without you, we couldn't have paid a single mortgage bill. His voice cracked, his hand clenched so tight that the veins bulged. Then, suddenly, Victor collapsed to his knees right in the middle of the living room, bowing before me. Tears streamed down his face, his voice desperate like a drowning man reaching for a lifeline. "Please, Dad, save my family. I've been arrogant, ungrateful. I swear I'll apologize publicly to everyone, to the community, on social media, at church, anywhere. I'll admit it all. Just please, let the kids have a home." Laura broke into tears too, her head bowed, her cheeks flushed with shame. She gripped Sophie's hand tightly, clinging to the last bit of courage left. "Dad, I owe you an apology as well. I treated your generosity as if it were inheritance by default, rather than a gift you sacrificed your life to give." Ethan sat stunned, his face red, stammering. You paid for my basketball lessons?" Laura nodded, her voice choked. "He paid for everything, nearly $1.5 million over 16 years. Sophie clung to her mother, her voice trembling. "So all these years, we lived off Grandpa?" The air was so thick that only the sound of heavy breathing could be heard. I leaned forward, my voice calm but cutting. "If I help you keep this house today, everything changes. I will pay directly for the kids' tuition, medical bills, clothing, and college funds. But I will not pay for the house, the cars, or any adult expenses again. You will stand on your own feet." Victor lifted his head, his eyes red, his jaw clenched so hard the veins in his neck stood out. He nodded. "We understand." "Ah, it is. We understand. Ah, 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 ah. I have one more condition: public acknowledgement, a letter in the community paper, a post on social media, and a direct apology before the neighbors at the church meeting. I want everyone to know the truth." Laura asked with a trembling voice. "When, Dad?" "Before the end of this week." Victor swallowed hard, nodded again, tears still running down his face. I stood up, opened my desk, and took out my checkbook. The room was dead silent, broken only by the sound of dialing the bank's number and the cold, automated voice on the line. The whole family sat holding their breath, as if awaiting a final verdict. "I'll arrange for an emergency payment," I said firmly, "but this will be the last time I pay for your house. I might help for a few more months, but after today, you either swim or you sink on your own." Sophie whispered to her mother. "Now, will we be okay?" Laura wiped her tears, and for the first time in a long while, her voice was steady. "We'll be okay, sweetheart. We'll be okay." And for the first time in 16 years, I believed she wasn't lying. Half a year later, on a Sunday afternoon in August, when the clock struck exactly 3 o'clock, they appeared at my door. But this time, the atmosphere was completely different. The living room, once heavy and dense with tension, was now filled with gentle light streaming through the windows. The early autumn rays shone across the carpet, reflecting a new warmth as if the house itself was breathing a sigh of relief at the reconciliation taking place. Laura walked in first. She was no longer the exhausted, hurried woman living in illusions of luxury. Now, she had learned to balance her life. Her job at the grocery store no longer drained her but had become manageable, leaving her more time for her family and herself. In Laura's eyes, there were no longer insecurities or endless comparisons, but a quiet confidence. Victor followed after her. I couldn't help but notice his worn shirt and scuffed shoes, but instead of the arrogance he once carried, he now appeared with a humility I had never seen before. His face lit up with simple joy, not the smug grin of superiority, but the sincerity of a man grateful for what he had. He no longer avoided my gaze. Instead, he smiled warmly and greeted me with respect. "Hello, Dad." Sophie ran over, not in her old soccer uniform, but in a pure white tennis outfit. Her knees were dusty with red clay, and a bit of sweat still clung to her collar. In her hand, she held up a small, gleaming trophy. "Grandpa, I won the tennis tournament." "That's wonderful, my dear," I smiled, bending down. "Tell me about the winning shot." While Sophie eagerly recounted her match, Ethan approached. This time, he didn't hold a report card but instead carried a formal certificate along with a small gift from the school, an award for outstanding student. His eyes sparkled with both pride and the hope of being acknowledged by his grandfather. Laura placed a dark blue folder on the table. "Dad, here's this month's budget report. We've managed to cover the mortgage, utilities, groceries, and travel expenses ourselves. We've even started a small emergency fund." I glanced at Victor. His voice grew lower, with a hint of emotion as he mentioned his volunteer work at the food bank. To be honest, I never thought I would learn gratitude by handing out food to others. But seeing families truly struggling, I realized just how selfish and naive we used to be. I stayed silent, my heart beating faster. A part of me still feared being disappointed once more, but their eyes, this time not deceitful, not evasive, slowly softened my doubts. Laura pulled out an envelope, her hands trembling slightly. "Dad, I wrote a letter to thank you." She took a deep breath and read it aloud, each word steady, though her voice cracked near the end. When she folded the letter, what once was hardness in my eyes turned into faith. Sophie tugged at my sleeve, handing me a handmade glittery card. "This is the card I made for you, Grandpa." Messy words were scrawled across it. "I love you. You're the best." Ethan wrapped his arm around me, offering another card. "Thank you for taking care of us, even when Mom and Dad forgot to say, please." I squeezed his hand gently, tears welling up but forcing myself to stay composed, only nodding in gratitude. Then Laura hesitated before speaking. "Dad, we've been thinking about buying a smaller house, something we can afford on our own incomes. Not immediately, but in a few years, once we've saved more. We want to prove that we can stand on our own." I looked into their eyes and answered slowly. "You don't need to prove anything with material things. As long as you live with gratitude and love, for me and for your mother, that is more than enough." As I said this, my gaze shifted to the photo of Helen on the shelf. In her eyes, I could almost see agreement, a glimmer of pride. The afternoon wore on. As the family prepared to leave, Ethan looked at me, his voice shy but full of yearning. "Grandpa, are you proud of us now?" I looked at all four of them, my grown daughter, my son-in-law who had learned humility, and my 2 grandchildren who now understood the meaning of gratitude. I nodded gently. "Yes, Ethan, I am very proud of all of you." They drove away in an old Toyota, replacing the flashy Mercedes of the past. But today, that car was no longer a symbol of decline. It was the choice of people who had finally learned to grow and begin a new chapter of their lives. I stood on the porch, the evening breeze brushing through my hair. In that moment, I felt truly freed. No more burden of 16 years of being taken advantage of. No more bitterness. I realized the revenge I had sought was never about punishment, it was about transformation. And sometimes, forgiveness is the sweetest justice of all. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts about it in the comments. Thank you for watching.